Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. This is a story of what happens when people who don't understand science imagine that they do. Euronews.travel wrote a story about vacationing in Greenland. In the article, they had a section about where to go if you want to see the climate crisis in action. This is what the author had to say about that. My trip to Greenland coincided with one of the only instances of rainfall on the ice sheet. As an environmental journalist faced with the enormity of global warming every day, you'd think this wouldn't faze me. But seeing how shocked and genuinely upset our guides were by this rain moved me and others to tears. Then they showed a picture of the Russell Glacier calving in late summer. The author continued, I don't think anyone needs to see the extremes of the climate crisis in person in order to care, but it was a truly sobering trip in many ways. On another day I visited Russell Glacier, and as I was photographing the ice, a huge chunk cracked and fell into the water. The other journalists with me just stood in silence for a long time after it fell, as we took in the enormity of what we'd witnessed. This person sounds pretty hysterical, and they're trying to convey it to their readers. But the problem was, nothing they saw was actually alarming, unusual, or evidence of climate change. Rainfall on the Greenland ice sheet is actually fairly common. In the southern parts of Greenland, it can rain even during the winter. But what was unusual last summer is that there was rain at high altitude near the center of the ice sheet. However, that's not the first time this has happened. It happened in 1933, and it happened twice in 1950. Every few years, the center of the Greenland ice sheet gets above freezing for a few hours, and if atmospheric conditions are conducive, it can rain. What the writer saw is not evidence of climate change, it's simply evidence of their own lack of knowledge of history and science. That was pretty bad, but their interpretation of a glacier calving as being evidence of climate change is beyond the pale of absurdity. Glaciers calving is what forms icebergs, like the one that sank the Titanic in 1912. Every winter, more snow falls on the Greenland ice sheet than can melt during its short summer. On average, nearly 400 billion tons of excess ice forms on Greenland's surface every year. And over the past 5 years, the average has been even higher than normal. Ice has been accumulating on the surface of Greenland over the past 5 years at an unusually high rate. But in order to maintain equilibrium, this ice has to go somewhere. So what happens is the excess ice forms glaciers, which are rivers of ice. The glaciers flow down to the sea and calve off icebergs. What the author was seeing wasn't evidence of climate change, it's just the normal behavior of glaciers. What they were seeing was caused by an excess of ice in the interior. Claims that glacial calving is evidence of climate change is like claiming that a waterfall is evidence of drought. CNN's Greenland expert is a Game of Thrones actor. He says winter is coming and the ice is melting. 5 years ago, the Washington Post announced that Greenland's largest glacier, the Jakobshavn Glacier, was in trouble. And 3 years ago, NASA reported that the Jakobshavn Glacier was growing for the first time in 150 years. In 1903, it was reported that the glacier had retreated 8 miles since 1850 and lost 20 to 30 feet in depth. The glacier retreated 10 miles between 1851 and 1883, but now that same glacier is growing. Greenland's second most famous glacier, the Petermann Glacier, has also grown about 10 kilometers over the past decade. Greenland's climate has been well understood for at least 150 years. Here's an article from 1873 titled Change of Climate. As an example of well-authenticated climatic changes, we may mention that Iceland and eastern Greenland are very much colder than they were 500 years ago. In Iceland, the immense trees which used to be common there have ceased to grow, though there are abundant evidences of the large growth at a former period, say in the 14th century. While in the opposite shores of Greenland, several valleys that were known to have been inhabited formerly have become wholly inaccessible in consequence of having been invaded by ice. Greenland and Iceland were much warmer during the Middle Ages, and the article also described how much warmer Europe was. During the Middle Ages, many places in Europe had thriving wine industries in places where they couldn't possibly produce wine now. They even grew sugarcane in France during the Middle Ages. The writer of this article imagines they're very smart and sophisticated when in fact they don't understand the basics of history or the basics of science. There's nothing unusual and nothing alarming going on in Greenland. In 1841, Charles Mackay wrote, "Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds." He wrote, "Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one." What's extraordinary about our time is the vast number of delusions being maintained by the public simultaneously. We're living in one of the most clueless moments in human history, made possible by the disinformation age. Toto's been working to help people recover their senses from the fake news media for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Curie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.